Well, here we are. After years of watching WoW collapse under its own weight, after years of developing lots of different forms of brain damage, we now know exactly why the Dark Era happened. Quite simply, Ian was afraid. He admitted to this publicly in a room full of game industry people. And what I love about this design talk that he gave is basically it's about how it took him a while to realize some mistakes and to learn new things about how to lead a game like World of Warcraft. Let's get into it. Like most of modern WoW, it started off in Legion. Okay, Mythic Plus, World Quest, Artifact Power, all of that stuff. That wasn't Ian's grand plan that he forced upon WoW like a dictator. No, it wasn't that. Remember, Tom Chilton was still game director when a lot of this was happening. So put simply, Legion wasn't the WoW that Ian made, it was the WoW that Ian inherited. But then, when it came time to make BFA, he thought his job was to go and make more Legion, and to make the problems that Legion had better. So that's exactly what he did. Or, tried to do. But, of course, it didn't have the fantasy of artifact weapons, it didn't have class halls, didn't have Illidan, or those great things. Ian recreated Legion in the form of systems design because he was kind of a systems designer first. That's why his team made Azerite armor to ape artifacts. From a systemic level. The Heart of Azeroth was there to give you your AP grind. They kept the world quests, they kept the emissaries, and then of course Shadowlands was kind of more BFA, but it got even more specific. Logging in, you could almost hear Ian say, play the game our way, or don't play at all. At least that's how it could feel to a player. And what I love about this design talk that he gave is basically it's about how it took him a while to realize some mistakes and to learn new things about how to lead a game like World of Warcraft. Now, before we begin, you've got a golden opportunity to get yourself geared up with UGREEN's Prime Day sale. Now, they're my personal go-to accessory brand. They're this video's sponsor, and they sent me a big old haul of goodies. And it's all deeply discounted too, up to 46% off with my links which are down below. So here's how I'm going to use it all. First, this is the 65-watt foldable gallium nitride charger. And this little guy is great. Basically, it's my everyday carry one because it's light, it's tiny, it's got 3 ports. Best of all, it's foldable, which is a really satisfying to fidget with. As is this, actually. This is the 2-in-1 MagSafe wireless charger. This thing's awesome. It'll actually charge your phone and your AirPods at the same time, and it's got a side port for your watch as well. And of course, they all feature overcurrent, overvolt, overtemp, and short circuit protection. And basically, right, I get all of the charging that I need in the same volume as my old single Apple charger, which is kind of wild. As for the webcam, that's going to live in my home setup, and well, look at this Mac Mini dock. This thing is awesome. It's got 5 USB-A, 2 USB-C, card readers, and an NVMe enclosure, which does kind of mean I've now got no excuse not to build my home media server because it was always planned to be using one of the new Mac Minis. Ah, boy. Okay, but the point is, these are all awesome, and now they're essentially cheaper than ever. You can get the best deals by going straight to the Prime Day links, which will be in the video description. A big thank you, of course, to UGREEN for supporting this channel. Some backstory then, and it's this backstory that actually makes the talk kind of unique. So as it turns out, he was supposed to give this talk 5 years ago. But 2020 happened. Shit got in the way. Now it's 2025. World of Warcraft is a completely different game. So what he talks about is going through his notes back from 2020 when he was originally supposed to give this talk. And thankfully for us, he doesn't agree with what he was going to say back then in many cases. Essentially, here's the core difference that we learn from this talk. He's not making the WoW that he was told to make anymore. So with BFA, it was basically the original WoW team DNA being passed over. He frames it as his solemn responsibility to carry that on. Now, originally, he believed his goal was to carry that vision exactly as he was given it, to essentially make sure that it never goes off track. But, as he covered in the talk, he soon realized something. Instead of him serving a vision, the vision kind of needed to serve us. Instead of making WoW the way they wanted to make it, one day they learnt to make the WoW that we actually wanted to play.
If for anyone here who is working on or thinking about releasing a game that will have an ongoing live service component, if you put that out there and people come to it and are playing it, congratulations, that is an amazing accomplishment. But it's also essential to realize that the moment you release that out into the world, the nature of designing that experience is transformed. Before it was released, it was your vision. It was your thing, your team's thing to craft. Once it's out there and it has become home to some number of players, it is now equally theirs, and it is their world that you need to be a caretaker of, as well as the designer of.
There you have it. That's Ian saying the words outright. So today, they actually are listening to feedback a lot more. They're taking it in a different light. Instead of fixing players playing the game the wrong way, they try to support playing the game. So that's why we've got our solo devs, warbands, quick gearing, player housing, them finally solving the add-on problem. All of these things essentially come from this realization. Now, you may recognize this from one of our recent videos. It's a desire path. Basically, Ian and his team no longer try to make us walk in the path that they set out. Where essentially in the past, every time they would see one of these desire paths that we would make ourselves, they would try to force us onto their own path. That would make us angry. They essentially used to build railroads so that we could only play their way. I remember, and it didn't impact everyone because PvP is maybe a little bit more niche in World of Warcraft, but whenever they changed PvP gearing so that it literally had a specific order that you went through, they did that in BFA. It's one of the most unhinged and insane designs I've ever seen in a game. They had logical reasons for it, but of course those made no sense for real, actual humans. And I think that example encapsulates just how bad the problem got during that era. Nowadays, it's different. They actually try to support our desire paths. That essentially means if we're doing something unexpected, they try to realize that there's probably a good reason for us doing that, so what they should do is try to help us do that way. Going even further, he says they avoid, and I quote, adversarial design patterns. You know those times where it almost felt like they were punishing you for trying to play the game the way that you wanted? I mean, it's something that we've been harping on about in our videos to Blizzard for years. It's nice to see Ian just say it here on stage. And it cuts through to a funny thing. What's real isn't important, or at least isn't always important. They may have their data, it's good to look at that data, but what Ian goes into depth on is how what players feel is what matters over everything else, and their goal is to balance how players feel. And to explain that, he talked about class balance. It's kind of fascinating. On stage, he pointed to Warcraft logs data from Cataclassic and the War Within. Modern class balance basically is way, way better than Cataclysm Classic. Yet, he says that it doesn't matter to how we feel, even if it is technically more balanced, because what matters is how people actually feel, not sims. Another way to put that is that if you're last on the damage meters by 2%, even if it's only 2%, it still is going to feel horrible, and that sort of thing will define a meta. So now, they instead have a huge internal focus on player emotion and player story. And if you felt like balance hotfixes are coming in far quicker than they used to, that's actually why. Now on paper, that's kind of awesome, but obviously they do need to be careful. Changing the game too often can make it feel like they're building an unstable ground. So there is a line in the middle, but at least it's good to hear him say that they understand they're making a game, not balancing a spreadsheet. Now you might be wondering, how did he figure all of this out? And if you think you've got an idea, well, you may still be just about as surprised as we were. Don't know about you, but I absolutely assumed that it was Shadowlands that broke the camel's back. It certainly broke loads of ours. You know, Choregast, all of that fun, the way the legendaries ended up being anti-fun, how the Maw was designed to be frustrating, all of that stuff. They gave us what they called meaningful choice, but it didn't feel good, and we just kind of called it restrictive bullshit. The wider response was that Shadowlands was more nightmare than game. You sort of wanted none of it, and so you rebelled. Now, Ian's theory at this point, was that Blizzard were making mistakes. Essentially, you wanted none of it, so you rebelled. And where this gets fun is Ian talks about basically what his theory was at the time. His theory was that at the time they were just making mistakes. That Shadowlands wasn't as good as Legion or Mists, and that was a skill issue on their part, that they weren't making WoW good enough. They weren't good enough at realizing the vision that had been passed down to them by the people who came before them. The other side of that then is that we as players didn't understand, that we definitely would have wanted their vision of World of Warcraft if it was done good enough by them. So what they were trying to do was to do it good enough. And that does explain many of the head-scratching decisions made in Battle for Azeroth and Shadowlands. Essentially, Ian and his team felt stuck trying to make a version of WoW that didn't seem to work. Shadowlands flopping didn't even change his mind, at least not by itself. What actually saved WoW was Classic. With Classic's release, Ian saw that J. Allen Brack was, in a little bit of a way, kind of right. Players didn't want to play Classic like they did in 2004. I know, the whole you think you do but you don't, because it turned out they absolutely did want to play WoW Classic, but they didn't want to play it the same way, and they actually went ahead and played it in a very different way. Ian says that in 2004, people picked talents that were somewhere in the middle of what they wanted to do. In his example, he talked about a build that would be fine for both PvP and raiding, that people were happy enough to build their character that way and make some sacrifices. But in 2020, people could not accept being suboptimal. They did want to play WoW Classic, but they definitely played it in a different way. So instead, they would grind out obscene amounts of gold so that they could swap talents consistently. And of course, not with a smile. They hated every second of it, but they did it anyway, because they had to be optimal, because that's how the modern player plays. And seeing that happen opened Ian's eyes. I suppose it was an example of people wanted to play Classic, they didn't want to play it in the same way, and look how much friction and anger they would push through just to have the optimal talent build for every situation. And this taught Blizzard that it wasn't necessarily World of Warcraft that changed what players did, that also players themselves had changed, and that therefore the WoW that they made with BFA and Shadowlands isn't actually what anyone wanted. So they had to change the vision of what they were making, and not try to just be recreating some passed down idea from an older generation, where game design was very, very different. The impact of this realization was fairly obvious and fairly immediate, because Dragonflight felt like it was a completely different game. As a game, I mean. I still think that Dragonflight was a narrative mess, a tonal mess, etc., but we've already talked about that. This is me talking about the video game designy bit. And the pace of change only seems to be increasing, because the War Within feels different again. And Midnight, well, Midnight is going to have player housing, and it's going to have, in many ways, no combat add-ons. That does actually mean they seem to want to make a game for a shifting audience. In a way, that means the designer's challenge is designing something for that shifting future audience, but obviously no one can see into the future. And most importantly for this example, Ian cannot see into the future. But thankfully, he also knows that.
And so what we had done was, again, optimize for something at the expense of players' experience today. And if it's not fun today, if the thing you're not making isn't fun right now, will there even be a tomorrow?
It felt good hearing Ian say that. This is not just some heavy philosophical stuff about the game. This is also Ian telling us what the future is going to look like. Albeit not directly, because he's not just going to get on stage and then leak a bunch of shit. But specifically, he talked about how they build World of Warcraft now, and how it's different. So for years and years, every expansion, they try to fix WoW forever. Have a grand forever fix. In the talk, he uses world quests as an example and how it solved questing in Legion. And most of us loved it all expansion, but in BFA, we grew tired of world quests. So essentially, world quests may have been perfect in Legion, but now in BFA, they were no longer perfect. They were only perfect for Legion. Basically, Blizzard realized that no one solution is going to be right forever, that the game needs to change to stay alive. And the best example he gave is actually talents. So on stage, he shows off the original talent system, and then he shows off the Mists rework. Now, the designers said they made a perfect, extensible system. And actually, the guys who made the original talent design actually said that the MOP one was so good, they wish they made it themselves. But we all know how that ended. In so many cases, we actually hated the MOP talents. They focused on making the perfect design, they solved designers' problems, but perhaps they forgot how we all felt about it along the way. So, whenever they built the Dragonflight talents, they stopped caring about perfect. They started focusing on something that we would actually want, now, today, even if they know that they may have to do it all over again in the future. You see, with talents, Blizzard soon got terrified. Every expansion, they would need to add new talent points, need to add new talents. How would the game survive that bloat? That led to the Mists of Pandaria talent system. And then, of course, it ended up leading to a lot of the borrowed power. Blizzard didn't really think they could do anything because it would have to last forever if it was in talents, and they needed a forever system. Whereas now they've just embraced that you can't fix something forever, because you probably aren't good enough to find the perfect solution, but also there is no temporally perfect solution. A perfect solution for now may be wrong for 5 years, because the game will have changed and the players will have changed. And the big learning, the big thing that Ian talks about in this presentation is that he's no longer afraid of that. That he's no longer afraid to ship a system that he knows may be a problem for future him. And he jokes about the team leaving problems for, as he says, future us. But that now they actually have faith in themselves. And that means they actually have faith that they'll be able to solve those problems when they arise. And that sometimes that price is worth paying if it means that right now the game is more fun. Now, you may argue that they're leaning a little bit too heavily in that right now, because the last patches have definitely needed a little more fun today work. It's been rocky in terms of delivery. But I think the principle is spot on for a changing game. Now, you may think, hang on, we've talked about a lot of philosophy things. What does this actually mean? What does it mean? Well, it means Blizzard have a lot of work to do, but they do seem to know it. Ian leads his team in a way that respects the game that we want to play. That respects that they'll never cheat their way out of doing hard work. But I think rather obviously, we're actually seeing where that's falling apart in the live game, and I think there are some things they need to recalibrate. I mean, we can see the game has got a bit of an identity crisis in supporting all the types of gameplay that exist within it. Their resources are clearly struggling under the weight of trying to change the game constantly. Sometimes it feels just for the sake of changing it. It, at worst, is them making instant, efficient changes rather than meaningful, well-considered ones that will last. Not forever, like some impossible system they would have tried to make in the past, but, last in a reasonable sense. Like in trying to make sure we have some change, some thing to do, they're pushing out stuff like Nightfall, recycling tons of content, doing time gating in a way that does not seem well considered. So, putting it simply as possibly, they overcorrected. What Ian said in his talk, I think, proves our theory correct, that right now they are moving out of fear and urgency instead of with faith and confidence. I think that they had a fear of not living up to their predecessors in the past, and they just weren't doing that good enough, which is why Shadowlands, etc. failed. That was the fear that they had then. My fear is that the damaged content, the underwhelming systems that stem from them acting out of fear and urgency will then erode their confidence, because I do think they need to take a few steps back and actually operate from a position of faith in their abilities and a healthy degree of confidence. Because it really seems that rather than being strong enough to believe in their own vision, that they're almost trying too hard to be people pleasers. I hope they can see that, because I think it is the new problem in their horizon. But it's not a bad problem to have, and it doesn't mean they haven't made progress. Progress is never linear. It's never only up. It's up and down and up and down and up and down. This is just like that. If they take a few steps back, just toward confidently doing their job as game designers, but without forgetting all of the lessons that they have learned. Lessons which I think have undeniably fixed WoW's deepest, most existential problems. If they get that right, which I absolutely think they can, then we will be in for a very strong era of the game. So, they still have a gigantic list of problems, but at least I think they are learning the right lessons from so many of them now. They just need to peel a little bit back from that urgency. Now, I get this can all be very heady, very in the clouds philosophical stuff. What if you want real meat, real drama for right now? Wow, I was overselling it. But look, this video about the one-button rotation, man, it's spicy shit. Go watch it next. I think you might like it. And as much as all this philosophical stuff is fun, sometimes you want to get down in the weeds. So yeah, watch it next. I'll see you over there.